Explore the history, relationships, expertise, and data that go into ensuring Stine growers get maximum yield potential. This is the Stine Seedcast. Here's your host, David Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. We've got another great episode lined up with special guests, expert insights, and discussion on everything you need to know about maximizing yield potential. On today's episode, our special guest is Iowa Farm Bureau President Brent Johnson. Welcome to the show, Brent.
Thanks for having me, David.
So Brent was elected president of Iowa Farm Bureau in 2021. He's been an outstanding advocate for Iowa agriculture and has been recognized with a number of accolades, including the 2020 Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship Leader Award. Brent farms in Calhoun County, Iowa, with his wife, LuAnn, his son, Matt, and his daughter-in-law, Rebekah. He and LuAnn also have a daughter, Kaylee, and 4 grandchildren. We look forward to learning more about Brent, his background in ag, his work as president and advocate for the Iowa Farm Bureau. So let's get started. So Brent, first off, why don't you just tell us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Calhoun County, and I'm a fifth-generation family farmer. So, and actually, my wife, LuAnn, and I, we've raised our family in the house that my great-great-grandfather built. So we just did some more remodeling, and as an old house does, and saw all those reiterations of when it was remodeled the second, third, fourth, and fifth time. But so it's really important for me to be a part of that and to know that my family's been around and involved in this industry and our land for so long. And pick up now and be an active everyday farmer full time and watch my son grow into his role as the 6th generation farmer. It's been really special and fun to watch.
And yeah, so Calhoun County, for the uninitiated, is just what we would probably consider kind of northwest quadrant of Iowa. So here from where we are today, you're probably an hour?
Just about 2 hours.
2 hours
northwest.
2 hours
of Des Moines.
northwest of Des Moines. Yep.
Yep.
So really nice part of the country. So you've had this great legacy and background in agriculture. Have you always known that you wanted to be involved in production agriculture?
Oh, absolutely. You know, my earliest memories are clearly wanting to be a farmer. You know, I was one of those farm kids that I was driving bigger things earlier than I should have been driving. And you know, Dad would set me out in the field and tell me to go to work for hours on end while he went off and did his other jobs. And I knew it from my earliest memory. And, you know, it wasn't always a given that I was going to be able to do it either. So I went to Iowa State University and ended up graduating there with a degree in agronomy. I worked in soybean and corn breeding for a while, worked in precision agriculture and agronomy services. And then I had a family member retire, and that really opened the window for me to go back home and do what I firmly believe I was put on this earth to do, is to be a full-time farmer.
Awesome. So one of the things we talked about in the intro is you've taken on the helm for the Iowa Farm Bureau. And, you know, as we talked about kind of before, you know, it's always fascinating to me. So many farmers are so giving of their time to the industry they love, and there's great organizations doing all kinds of work. I guess my question to you is, what got you started in Farm Bureau and what led you to the path you were on, where taking that leadership role in Iowa Farm Bureau?
That's a fantastic question, and really it goes back to that time when I was able to go home and start farming full time. And you know, I'd been off the farm maybe almost 10 years by that time, if you include college and working in the professional field. And so by the time I was able to get back home, I was really looking for something to get involved with, to make a difference locally in the community and just be one of those community members that people rely on. And while I was searching for what that spot might be, actually a friend of my dad's was on the Calhoun County Farm Bureau board at the time, and he says, why don't you come to a county meeting and see what this is all about? So I went to one meeting, and I really thought, you know, that was a pretty good experience. I should learn more. And so I went to the second meeting the next month, and at that meeting, county voted me in as treasurer of the County Farm Bureau. and off we go. So then, you know, I got involved in the Young Farmer program pretty early, some of the leadership programs that Farm Bureau offers. And so So really, I give a lot of credit to that organization. I do consider myself a farm boy from Northwest Iowa, and it's really the leadership, the cultivation of those skill sets that the Iowa Farm Bureau has done for me, that has allowed me to flourish, I guess, if you will, and really reach outside of my comfort zone and care about the world beyond my fence rows. So as you get started down that pathway, it's just sort of snowballed on me, and it wasn't that long. It didn't seem like, and I made it a goal to serve on the state board, and here I am, found most recently as president of the Iowa Farm Bureau.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious how you think that helped shape you as a farmer. Things you learned, things I don't know. What did it teach you?
Oh, it's the people skills right off the bat. A lot of the soft skills that are a part of it. I mean, I truly one of those guys that I could be happy working at home with my head down every single day of my life, and ignoring all the noise that's going on off the farm. But to get involved, to know that there is a bigger world there and it does impact all of us in production agriculture, really it was those experiences that I found myself almost I have to be involved in something outside of my own farm operation. And so that was, I think, critical to where I ended up today. And, if I be selfish for just a moment and think about some of the experiences that I've had, I mean, I've built a business dealing with precision agriculture and digital data and drones and machine automation, and those soft skills that Farm Bureau cultivated in me really helped me communicate what my goals were in business, what my goals are on the farm, and paint that vision for those folks as to why they should trust me and why they should come along with where I think we're going in the future of agriculture.
So kind of related to that, I mean, you said you've got another generation coming up, and for us in the seed business, of course, we're dealing with agriculture in much the same way. The generational stratification, right? You've got a lot of different generations now that we're dealing with. How do you talk to growers who? Because I would assume it's probably very easy to say, I got a lot to do here at home. I don't got time to go out and go to meetings. What do you advise young farmers who may think, hey, I've got my hands full here. I don't have time to get on a board and do this stuff?
Well, everybody's life expectations are different, but there's absolutely no way that if you would have asked me 20 years ago what my future held for me, that I would have been serving the role that I'm serving today and had all the experiences that I've been able to have. So, just that willingness, that openness to say yes to some of those opportunities and to, when those positions open in front of you, have the courage and the strength to at least explore what's behind that door. I think it's really important. You'll find yourself in a much better place as a farmer, as a family member, if you're more involved, more connected with more people, not only across the state of Iowa, but across the country and other countries as well, across the entire world. Perspective is absolutely huge, and that really helps me. It's hard to be tangible about it, but it really helps me be a better farmer. I truly believe that when it comes to the day in, day out of what it means to get the work done at home. With all those other experiences and history, it's hard to understand, but it does feel different at home now.
So that broader perspective kind of colors your thought process as you're thinking about what you do at home on your own farm.
No doubt about it.
Yeah. So you've had an opportunity to work in a lot of different arenas and see where we've been in production agriculture and probably get some vision of where we're going. Mm-hmm. Over the next few years, 5 to 10 years, what do you think are the big issues that row crop agriculture is going to be facing?
Well, if you look at some of the buzzwords today, sustainability and some of these ESG conversations, and I don't know where we're going to go with all this stuff, but how does agriculture play a role? And one thing that I've talked a lot about is really agriculture, farmers. We're the good guys in this conversation, and we're the ones that for generations have been doing work the right way, continuing to make progress and promoting agriculture and taking care of the environment and handing it off to the next generation. It's so ingrained into so many farmers that most of them don't even think about what they're doing. It's hardwired. And so to now navigate a space where what we've done for generations instinctively is now becoming a buzzword in boardrooms and decision halls across the country. How are we going to interact with that? How are we going to play into it? How are we going to communicate our story into those? I think it's going to be very critical as to set up the next and second generations out from now. And to be able to do that, yes, with data and information. I mean, that's kind of my background is very analytical, but also to do it in storytelling and things like this podcast right now. The ability to communicate the story of agriculture to people who do and don't understand what the future looks like, I think is very, very important.
Yeah, that's a great point. Communication being critical for farmers to tell the story that, is their story, right? And like you said, things like sustainability, which are very popular today, have been going on in various forms for a long, long time.
Yep.
Where best practices are best practices, and so that's the goal. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the experiences you've had with Farm Bureau as it relates to international trade. Our primary focus on this podcast is seed, but we have to acknowledge that seed has a home somewhere, and it's either going to end up as grain or it's going to end up in pigs and chickens and go overseas. And so you've done a lot of work on international trade through your time with Iowa Farm Bureau, and recently you took a trip overseas to Vietnam and Philippines. Wondered if you'd spend a little time and talk to us about some of that, what your learnings were.
We'll be glad to. I mean, I've truly feel like I've been blessed, and I've traveled the world, been in many, many different countries, and this to go to Vietnam and the Philippines not very long ago, that was a new one for me to visit those two countries specifically. And it's mostly, most of that experience really had to do with the idea of emerging markets and the mass of their populations entering the middle class. That's something that's unique to those two countries, I think. And you think about the potential of future protein needs. And the way those two countries individually are approaching this is very different because their governments are different. And so you've got an interesting government play there, but both are regionally very close to each other. And they're both in that place where the countries, like I said, are emerging, but that has to do with some of their age. The average age of the United States, I think, is 38, which actually sounds a little young, but the average age is 38 in the United States. And in Vietnam, it's 32. And actually in the Philippines, it's 24.
Wow.
So when you think about, those working class years coming ahead, there's a lot of potential there in those two countries.
So the most recent trip that you were on was through the state of Iowa?
Yeah. The Iowa Economic Development.
Okay.
Yep.
And with the goal of kind of exploring these new markets, these emerging markets, and trying to figure out if there's a place for U.S. crops, U.S. Protein.
Yeah.
What did you find out that you didn't expect to find out?
So both countries that we were in, they were talking about the quality of products that the United States has. I think we all agree that we can grow the most consistent, high-quality crops, whether it's corn or soybeans, that any other country has the ability to do. The thing that really caught me off guard, though, is that in both of those countries, the United States is the only country trading with those countries right now that doesn't have a free trade agreement. So we are tariffed going into those countries where the others are not. So we are at a price disadvantage. So even though we've got the best quality, the most consistency, price is still price. And when you're talking about emerging markets, those economies are growing. They are becoming modernized, but price is still price.
So working through the channels of government trying to reduce tariffs can potentially lead to increased trade in markets like this.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be I can't say the word easy, but that's going to be the quickest remedy is to make sure that the United States is on a level playing field with the other countries, and then we can talk apples to apples when it comes to quality and protein levels or amino acid levels and consistency and supply and logistics and all those things that we know that the United States is superior at.
In the notes I was reviewing from comments you've had about your trip, one of the other things that struck me was talking about, and you mentioned quality, right? And so as it relates to pork, I think there was a story about quality being relative. And that's something I hadn't really thought about. And I guess I wondered if you expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, so we traveled there with IDALS. So Secretary Nag was with us and IEDA was with us. But we were also with Iowa corn, Iowa soybeans, the cattlemen, and the pork producers and Farm Bureau. Yeah. And so we weren't just looking at grains, we were also looking at the meat proteins as well. And so one of the trips that we had, we'd stopped in a modern grocery store, something that we would all consider as just normal, but by their standards, it's something unique and different. And to see the meat cuts in the case like we're all used to seeing. One thing that really jumped out when it comes to their pork was there was a lot of back fat left on the cuts of pork. And so we asked about that, and they said, well, that's the taste, that's their preference of quality. In the meat case, they want to see that layer of fat. And so by the United States consumer standards, all that gets trimmed off. And so they want to see a lean cut of meat in the grocery stores in the United States. So it's part of our manufacturing process of those meat cuts that those fats, those layers get trimmed off and get used in other places in the process. Over there, they want to see that as a level of quality. So the protein, the marbling, yes, it was a part of that conversation. But something as simple as a layer of back fat really is a barrier. And pork in those two countries is their number one meat source. So number one, they eat rice. Number two, they eat pork with their rice. And so to know that we have some possible manufacturing tweaks or how can we market, how can we inform, how can we change that system to satisfy those emerging markets?
Yeah, because then I assume if you would just deliver cuts of pork according to how we would normally package those here in the States, they would view that as an inferior cut of meat because they say, well, this isn't what I'm used to seeing.
Yeah. I mean, we all have our biases as to what visually we find appealing to what we think is going to taste good. Theirs is different than ours.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Well, like we talked earlier in this episode, I think oftentimes it's easy for so many people to say, well, I don't necessarily have time to get involved or time to even dig into this issue. And international marketing is probably something that's so nebulous sometimes that people don't even want to fathom or get involved in it. When you talk to other farmers, how do you reinforce them the importance of understanding what's going on in international marketing?
Well, whether it's international marketing or anything else that's hard to deal with, hard to understand, hard to be tangible about, it's really important to be involved in that process. That ability to promote Iowa agriculture, that ability to ensure that our food sources have a destination. The United States, Iowa specifically, we way overproduce what we're able to consume. And so we are dependent on trade. And so we have to have a source, we have to have a place for our products to go. That's what our economy is built on. There's not many places in the world that have those experiences. So that ability to be able to communicate what we do, how we do what we do, and why we do what we do, I think is very important. And so those producers, those farmers, the young people growing up, there's so many distractions. There's a lot of things that you could get involved with in your commodity groups, in your community, your churches, however you want to spend your time. And ultimately it comes down to what's important to you. You'll find the time, you'll make the time. And if it's not, there's lots of excuses out there.
Sure. Yep. So before we leave the topic of Farm Bureau, I guess I'd ask you, for any of our listeners who are listening, what would you want them to take away from this conversation, understanding about Farm Bureau and what they do?
Well, I wouldn't be where I'm at. I wouldn't have the operation that I've got. I wouldn't be as successful as I am without this organization. And I believe that to my core. And, the Iowa Farm Bureau, when it comes to legislative priorities, when it comes to our process and finding those priorities, we want all of our members involved in that because, the grassroots mantra sometimes gets blown over. But I've seen it work time and time and time again that somebody out there on a farm, on a county board, has an idea. They run that through our policy process, and it shows up as an initiative that the Iowa Farm Bureau and our 155,000 members in our state can get behind and make an influence not only in Des Moines, but also Washington, D.C. and across the seas, as we've been talking about.
So switching gears, let's talk about the season that is to come. We did a little bit of recon work, and I found out that you are a Stine customer. So tell us what your plans are for this coming year.
Yeah, well, good recon. Yeah, so, as we sit here today, it's mid-April. I actually just took delivery of my Stine seed just yesterday, and so they're all sitting in the machine shed ready to go. So when this weather system that we're currently experiencing blows out of here, we're going to get that soybean planter cranked up and stick those little buggers in the ground and see what happens.
There's talk all over the industry these days about, do you plant corn first? Do you plant beans first? Any opinion on that?
So my experience is somewhat unique in some of the roles that I have to play. So we've chosen to run 2 planters, which for a farm our size is somewhat unique, but that does give us the ability to keep one as corn and we'll push beans with the other one. And so, yes, I've got a couple 100 acres of corn in right now, but as soon as this weather blows out of here, we'll be running both planters at the same time. So, from my agronomy training, growing degree days matter in a soybean plant. And so to get that in the ground timely and all those things that we need to make sure that we're giving that plant the opportunity to produce as much as possible, to get enough growing days onto that plant is ultimately what produces pods at the end of the season and fills them out properly. So we're going to get them out there early and make sure they're treated properly and set hopefully a whole bunch of 4-bean pods out there.
So to my question, you're splitting the difference and planting both at the same time.
Yeah. That's a much simpler answer than the one I gave you.
Nope, that sounds like a good practice. What are the things you have your eye on? And maybe that's a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. What's next for your operation?
So we've got some family dynamics that are happening right now. So, it's nothing really any different than any other family, but, between retirements and whatnot, trying to make sure that our operation is secure and stable for the next generation is always top of mind. We do have a fairly advanced operation when it comes to technology. Again, that's part of my background. So when it comes to machine automation and data collection and making informed decisions and tying those to economic outcomes and possibilities, I think we got some room to make some improvements there as good as we are today. But ultimately, we're out there farming for dollars, and bushels are a part of that equation.
Yeah, and so you mentioned data collection and some of the technologies that you're exploring. Can you elaborate a little bit on what are some of those things that you're looking at that maybe haven't been applied in the past, or at least not to the extent that you're thinking about?
When it comes to the easy ones to explain, the hard ones to implement have a lot to do with the nutrient conversation when it comes to the input side of the equation. So, some of the work that I've done in the past, say on corn and side dressing corn, how much nitrogen do you use and how far can you get your nitrogen use efficiency number? And so, most historically, a lot of the state of Iowa is running, about a pound a bushel or something like that. And so, we're starting to push 0.6 to 0.7 pounds per bushel produced right now. And a lot of that comes with practices and equipment, but it also comes in data. So what parts of those fields are producing well? Are they producing enough? Do we need to push them harder? And what parts of those fields do we need to pull back? And how do you measure that in season? How do you make those adjustments timely? So, we've used a lot of drone imagery and splitting the light waves, if you will, to make this somewhat simple so that we can take the temperature of that crop, understand what it's telling us, and, match that up with population, match it up with soil types that are underneath it, and understand that, okay, we need to push just a little bit harder with nitrogen here, or we need to pull back a little bit. So to be able to make those in-season timely tweaks to those practices, I think are really going to be fruitful as we learn how to do that better in the next 5 years.
And so you mentioned nitrogen, as a management tool. So in terms of corn, talking about split application,
right,
timely application, and in this case, how much? putting on how much and when so that you're making the most use of the nitrogen you apply.
Yep.
And I think we'd be right on board with that. I think that's one of the big battlegrounds to come, is to figure out how to grow it most profitably and make sure that you've got enough there to feed that crop to maximum yield potential.
Absolutely. This conversation about sustainability, environmental care, that's not exclusive of making money. In fact, if you do it properly, they go hand in hand. If you are efficient with your inputs and you understand the quality of your outputs and that potential, you can manage that crop better. And we've proven it year over year, generation over generation, taking better care of the environment. We're going to continue to do better on both fronts as we move forward.
Well, Brent, thanks so much for joining us today, talking about your farm operation, your time in industry leadership, and the initiatives of the Iowa Farm Bureau. I really appreciate you coming today.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, David.
Well, that's our time for today. I want to thank our guests and our listeners for joining us on another episode of the Stine Seedcast. We'll be back again soon with more expert interviews and insights about all things Stine. And to never miss an episode, subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found.
Subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found. To learn more about Stine and its elite corn and soybean genetics, visit stineseed.com. Stine has yield.